Welcome back to the channel, everybody. So today we're going to talk about a topic that we've sort of talked about a little bit here and there in prior videos, but we really haven't deep dive into, and a lot of people have been asking me for this one, and that is going to be talking about China invading Taiwan. Now, for those of you who don't know, I spent my entire career in 1st Special Forces Group, which is in charge of the Asia Pacific Theater, and the last part of my career in Okinawa, which that unit is pretty much in charge of the planning portion of the potential defense of Taiwan if this were to actually happen. Okay, so while I'm not going to pretend I'm some expert, okay, I do think I have a unique perspective, as spent a lot of time actually, thinking about these things and working with a unit that's trying to figure this out. So just so you know, of course, there'll be no sensitive or classified information in this. It'll be surface level. And at the end of the day, these are going to be my opinions and perspectives. So, try not to get all huffy about it. If you don't agree, whatever, I don't care anyway. Now, there's a lot we have to cover. This is a very complicated subject, right? It's not as easy as, China invade Taiwan, okay? There's so much nuance to it and potential and things that could happen and change that this video is probably going to end up being a little bit longer. But if this is a topic that you're interested in, I think you're going to find this video really interesting. All right, so these are all the things that we need to talk about. All right, it's a pretty big list, and we're gonna just work our way through these. Now, before we jump into the video, of course, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe on the video. Thank you so much for the support to the channel. Of course, it's continuing to grow at a crazy pace. And also, I know a lot of you reached out to me about the merch store. We're saying it was out of stock and then being down. We've got it finally shored up. So if you've been trying to get yourself some merch, all right, get out there and grab it. I restocked all the sizes. We got everything in stock. So go check it out. Now, let's jump into the video. So, of course, first, what should we really do? Let's talk a little bit about the history, okay? And this is going to be very surface level. We're not going to spend a whole lot of time wasting on doing this. You could look this up yourself, okay? But the basic history of how China and Taiwan became two separate countries, okay? Because it's important to understand as we move forward and the potential of if China were to actually try to invade. So, for those of you who don't know, pretty quickly following World War II, 1949, there was a giant civil war in China. Obviously, we know the Communist Party of China took over and overthrew the Republic of China, the official, at the time, government of China. Okay, so they lost the war. And in result of that, the Republic of China fled the country, and about 1.2 million people fled, to the island of Taiwan and have been there ever since, right? How were they able to do that? So Japan actually owned Taiwan as an island all the way up until they surrendered in World War II. And then by surrendering World War II, China was able to get actually control of the island, and that's how the Republic of China, all those people were able to flee mainland China and flee the Communist Party, okay? And then, of course, as we know, the Communist Party of China and Mao ended up slaughtering millions and millions of people after that, right? So, why is that important to understand? It's important to understand because when we think of it in current times, like Taiwan, China, two different countries, yes, but not two different people, okay? The exact same shared ancestry. You need to think of these more as two different political parties, okay? So that becomes relevant when we're talking about China invading and potentially slaughtering millions of ethnically Chinese people, okay? So keep that in mind as we move forward. Now, since Taiwan has been founded, the Communist Party has not been able to exert authority or control over Taiwan. However, they still, up to this day, consider Taiwan basically a renegade state of the nation, but they say that they own Taiwan and that they're the official government of China, whereas, of course, Taiwan says the opposite. All right, so quick rundown of backstory of how that all happened, but that gets us very surface level to where we are today. Now, when we're talking about a country potentially invading another country, what is Probably the most important metric to look at, the military strength of each country, okay? Obviously, it's extremely important when it comes to war, right? Who's got the more troops? Who's got the better equipment? Et cetera, et cetera. So let's actually take a look at this, and we'll run through it together and just walk our way through and take a look. So as we look, we have China, we got Taiwan. As you see, these top 4, ground forces, Navy, Air Force, reserves, these are personnel, number of soldiers, okay? So you see here, China ground forces, almost 1 million. Taiwan, not even 100,000. Okay, Navy, 260. Navy, 40. Air Force, 400,000. Air Force for Taiwan, 35,000. Okay, and then reserves, backwards here, as Taiwan has way more reserves, as they basically keep the entire nation on standby to bring back into the war to defend themselves. All right. Now, when we go down to equipment, all right, we can see, if you're starting to notice a pattern here, China is about 10 times as big by every metric other than reserves than Taiwan, be it personnel, equipment, tanks, aircraft, submarines, naval ships, all right, and artillery. Almost 10 times as strong, as well equipped. So, of course, in a one-on-one, peer-to-peer fight, who's going to win that fight? It's pretty obvious. But again, there's a lot of nuances to this. This isn't just a military versus military go war. Whoever stronger wins. That's not the case in this conflict. That's really what we're going to have to deep dive through as we go. Okay, now, just because China is obviously 10 times as big, 10 times as strong, they have huge weaknesses and deficiencies, whereas Taiwan has some massive strengths. Okay, what are some of Taiwan's biggest military strengths? Sorry, I gotta itch my mustache. All right, what are some of Taiwan's biggest military strengths? One, they're on an island. Okay, and if you know your history about when America was trying to move through the Pacific and take islands from the Japanese, it is an absolute nightmare to militarily try to take an island by force. Okay, so, and when we take a look and actually look at the geography of Taiwan, okay, so if you'll notice on the east side of the country, the entire border there, that is very steep, rocky, mountainous cliffs. You're not going to be able, if you're China, to land ships on the east or try to have some diversion type thing where you could encircle the island or anything like that. China is going to have to invade from the west side. That gives Taiwan a very strict advantage in that they can put all of their weaponry, artillery, everything on the west coast towards the Strait of Taiwan, which China has to come through to invade Taiwan. Okay, that's a huge military advantage for Taiwan. So those numbers, even though they're massively misrepresented, they do have some strengths. Geography is a huge strength when it comes to war, combat, and battles. All right. And then what is one of Taiwan's other biggest strengths? While technically, you have to understand, almost no one is an ally of Taiwan officially. Taiwan still does have allies, okay? And their biggest allies being the United States, Japan, Australia, New Zealand, very strong military nations across the board in that regard. Okay, so now that doesn't mean, and we'll get into this, there's any guarantee that those nations are going to come to the defense of Taiwan militarily. Maybe they will, maybe they won't. We'll talk about that. But it is a potential deterrent towards China taking the risk. All right, so we got to move into the next portion. China actually taking Taiwan by force. Okay, how are they going to go about doing that? Right, we talked about, again, Taiwan being an island, a small island. It leaves very little options when it comes to taking a nation by force for the Chinese. Okay, the reality is, China, if they want to invade, okay, through personnel to get onto the island, they're going to have to essentially destroy everything Taiwan has. Okay, they're going to have to bomb Taiwan into the Stone Age, right? Because they've got to destroy all of Taiwan's artillery all through the beaches, or they won't be able to get their ships across the Strait of Taiwan, all their defensive fighting positions, all of their infrastructure. They're basically going to have to turn Taiwan to dust, right? And kill millions and millions of ethnically Chinese people who have a lot of the shared ancestry with people in mainland China, that is not going to be supported even by the people of China, okay? Because Chinese people consider Taiwan, again, part of China. So if you were to just, you're basically being the king over dust and bones, all right? Does that do anything for China for reunification? Not really, okay? So that's a big deterrent and problem for China that a lot of people don't really think about, okay? And that's if Taiwan's willing to fight, you know, to the death, much like Japan did during World War II, which we'll get to that because that's no guarantee as well. Now, what's also going to happen if China decides to invade is, for those of you who don't know, pretty much all of the world's super chip, whatever you want to call them, semiconductors, and we're talking about the highest level chips in the world. These are the ones that go into our crazy, you know, laser guided munition bombs and GPS guided weaponry and all these things, and a lot of other supercomputers and stuff like that. They are all made in Taiwan by a company called TSMC. And so Taiwan has already announced, and you can be very sure America is not going to let the Chinese have access to those. They will self-destruct all of those so the Chinese cannot have them, all right? That's bad for the entire world, okay? So there's a ton, and China itself, there's a ton of fallout for that, right? I know Taiwan, TSMC has some factories in, I think they're working on one in America and a few different places now, but not the ones that make the super chips, all right? Those are all in Taiwan, so that's a big, big deal. Now, so again, will the people of China actually support the utter slaughter of everyone in Taiwan? Probably not, okay? So what is China and Xi Jinping really gaining there, okay? Because you have to understand, Xi Jinping, you know, he's made it clear this is going to be part of his personal legacy, all right? That he was the one that reunified China, but if he does it in that way, it's probably not going to go down great for his legacy, and he understands that. Okay, doesn't mean that they might not do it, but that's a big deterrent. Now, the next biggest deterrent, all right, that most people don't understand or really think about when it comes to China. Yes, they have a huge military, tons of soldiers, all the equipment in the world. Could they just absolutely obliterate Taiwan into the Stone Age? Sure, okay, but China has massive weaknesses, and especially when you're talking about a conflict with Taiwan geographically, okay? So the biggest weakness for China, which is going to be exploited massively if this happens, is China's lack of natural resources. For those of you who don't know, China is extremely naturally resource poor, okay? Things they lack, arable land, farmable land. Those of you who don't know, they're like 30% of the average arable land of a normal nation, okay? So they can't produce a whole lot of food on their own. They don't have any minerals in their country. Extreme lack of fossil fuels, oil and gas, extreme lack of wood, timber, okay? Pretty much all of the resources you need in a modern society, they have to import. They don't have any of their own. And I'll explain why that's a big deal here when we talk about going to war with Taiwan. Now, oil is obviously the biggest one, okay? You have to have oil and gas to, you know, move and conduct war in a war party, okay? It's the most critical resource, that and food for your soldiers, but it's probably the most critical resource. And for those of you who didn't know, 80% of Taiwan's oil and gas comes through the Strait of Malacca, and I'll show it up here, okay? It comes from the Middle East, India, places like that, all the way through the Gulf, up through the Strait of Malacca, and then through the Strait of Taiwan, okay? That's that small strip that runs through Taiwan and China. Why is that a big deal? That war kicks off, and we're a full-scale war. All of Taiwan's artillery, they're gonna be able to strike any oil tanker coming through the Strait of Taiwan. It's gonna cripple 80% of China's oil imports, gone overnight, right? Now, the other 20%, as you'll see, does come from Russia, okay? So that is gonna have to ramp up exponentially. They're gonna have to find a way to get that oil, all of that oil, into the country via ground lines, okay? That's gonna be a huge undertaking, and again, potentially completely cripple China, their military, their economy, you know, everything will get crippled if the Strait of Taiwan currently, sorry, mustache, if the Strait of Taiwan gets shut off completely. Okay, it's that's the most critical weakness for mainland China by far. All right, so yeah, now for those of you, I mean, I'm sure most of us know that how does China even, you know, manage to feed their people, to bring in any natural resources to do all this? Well, they export one thing pretty much exclusively, and that is cheap labor to the rest of the world. Okay, that also is important when we talk about where they export that cheap labor to. And I don't mean workers, I mean obviously American companies, British companies, everybody has all of their things made in China because it's so cheap. Okay, so China also can cut that off from the rest of the world, including America, to where we basically get gutted as a country and our entire country collapses out from underneath us, Australia as well, because we are so dependent on China. That is why politics, there's always the talk about needing to decouple ourselves from the Chinese economy, but of course, we have one political party that is never going to let that happen. All right, so just some things to think about. Kind of a weakness and a strength in that regard. So, next big one is, what is America's response going to be if China invades Taiwan? This is the big one, right? Taiwan has to, if they're invaded, have the military strength of America, Japan, Australia help them. They cannot win this war on their own. It's not going to happen. We looked at the numbers. It's just the feasibility isn't there. Okay, so my biggest thing here is, I think you have to say, honestly, it depends on who's in charge, okay? I'll say, and again, without breaking sensitivities or anything like that, when I was out in Okinawa under the current administration, again, I said in my last video, we were sending all of our ammo storages, all our supplies to the front in Ukraine, okay? Very little being done to really plan if, or do anything about if China actually decided to invade, okay? We are not ready. Let's be honest. Militarily, we are not ready to deal with that. We're not. We're too busy in Ukraine and Russia, Israel, all of these things, all right? So if they just up tomorrow and decided to do it, would America get involved militarily? No, I don't believe that for 1 second under the current administration, okay? Whether you agree with that or not, I don't really care. That's not the point. That's the reality, right? So, so what would we do? All right, I could foresee potentially, all right, we get involved in a proxy war. And this is like the biggest involvement I see America getting in. We get involved in a proxy war-esque support, much like we are in Ukraine. Okay, we're not technically in Ukraine, right, with soldiers and things like that, but we're supplying weapons, ammunition, HIMARS, all this crazy stuff, right? Potentially we get involved in that regard. I don't believe under the current administration they even do that. I think what you see is the reality of sanctions, okay? The slaps on the wrist and sanctions, okay? And a big reason why is you have to understand the current administration and the entire apparatus of the media, Hollywood, sports, I mean, corporations, everything you look at, they are massively enriched by China, okay? And their involvements and their relationships with China, even a lot of politicians, all right? So they're not about to ruffle too many feathers, okay? It's going to be finger slaps and sanctions that don't actually do anything to hurt China, much like the same thing that happened with Hong Kong, right? Did we actually step up and try to do anything? No, we just said, oh, well, it is the way it is. Sadly, that's probably what's going to happen, okay? If, again, this were to happen tomorrow, a lot of things could change, right? Different leadership comes in, different people are in charge of the Department of Defense. That could overhaul all of this, all right? So again, hard to really say what in the future America's response will be. But again, like, we are so reliant on Taiwan for things like semiconductors and chips, we really can't give that up as America either, because that could massively cripple us. So it's a huge conundrum, okay? Now, allies, real quick. We talked a little bit about it. Who could potentially get involved, right? On the allied side, World War II, that's speak. Japan, Australia, right? Most likely because they're in the South China Sea. That could heavily affect them in the area. Maybe if they decide to, okay? Or it might be the same thing as the United States where they just say, oh, bad China, don't do that. And that's the extent of it, right? It's hard to really tell. I would say at this point, probably nobody gets involved. That's my personal opinion on it, from the way I look at the state of the military in the world right now, okay? Now, I think one of the most important things to understand as we move forward in this video is sort of the political and the populace base in Taiwan. Okay, this never gets talked about. Everybody just assumes 100% of Taiwan is vehemently against reunification and the CCP. Okay, not the case at all right? So the way I like to explain this is to sort of think about American politics in a way, all right? If we think about the last presidential election, right, you had 81 million people vote for Joe Biden, you had 70-something million people vote for Donald Trump, okay? 150-ish million people voted. However, we've got 330 million people in this country. Obviously, it's a shit ton more than that. We're just not honest about it. But what does that mean? Less than half of the American people actually voted in the election or give a shit about politics at all. All right, so think of Taiwan in that same way, right? In that sort of 25, 25, 50 split, where 25%, and again, these numbers aren't perfect, right, with the math. This is just kind of estimations about how most cultures are. 25% of the people are vehemently against the Communist Party of China and do not want reunification. 25% of the people are either sympathizers of the CCP or actually supporters of the CCP. And then 50% of the population who just doesn't give a shit either way, all right? And that is very, very important when we actually start to think about things like, will Taiwan actually fight if they're invaded, okay? Well, if 75% of the population is either doesn't care or anti or is pro-CCP anyway, oof, I don't know, maybe, right? And the other big one to understand is if this happens, it's not going to be this Taiwan on island, fight China coming. No, with that many ethnically Chinese and actually probably, I would bet, tens of thousands to hundreds of thousands of actually CCP people and agents and sleeper cells in Taiwan, when that kicks off, massive insurgency pops off from inside Taiwan that Taiwan probably won't be able to deal with. Wow, especially while they're being invaded. Almost impossible, right? So that is something that we really have to consider when thinking about if this happens, right? If the threat of China invading, or they even begin to posture to invade, kicks off this massive insurgency inside Taiwan itself, China might not even have to actually ever step foot on soil to actually take control of Taiwan in that way. All right, so just some things to think about. Now, how likely is it that this will actually happen? Now, let's say in the next few years, okay? So estimates have been over the last 3 or 4 years that China would invade Taiwan by 2027, okay? Could be sooner, could be later, could be never, okay? What's the actual likelihood? I think in the current state of the world, it's becoming more likely because of things like the massive war in Ukraine, Russia, potentially a huge war in the Middle East about to break out with Israel, Iran, all those places. That actually incentivizes the idea of China taking Taiwan by force, because the West and America is so preoccupied militarily with other areas, they're not going to be able to spread themselves so thin. However, I do think because of all the things we talked about, the weaknesses and what's to gain and all these things, I think it actually is pretty low likelihood China takes Taiwan by force, okay? What's the likelihood I think they take Taiwan in general? Extremely high, and I'll explain that here in a second, okay? Now, keep in mind, China has a 100-year plan, right? They think way into the future, whereas Americans, we think in 2 years in front of our face, okay? Because that's when the next election cycle is. They don't have that problem, so they're willing to wait, okay? However, Xi Jinping has made it very, very clear that, again, he wants on his legacy to take Taiwan. that legacy needs to happen probably in the next 5-10 years for that to happen, right? So how do they go about doing it? I foresee they use the strategy that they basically use in Hong Kong and they're using here in America with the left, and that is they just take it by democracy. Okay, they just keep getting more and more support from, you know, the communists inside Taiwan, because there are pro-communist politicians in Taiwan, right? There was in Hong Kong. That's exactly how that fell. And you look at America, we are getting pushed further and further by literal communist politicians, okay? And what do? They use democracy to get elected and then enact communist policies, okay? So that's sort of how I foresee the more likely way China goes about doing it. That's a little bit longer of a game plan, but again, they're willing to wait long term, okay? So if they just keep getting more and more support in Taiwan, or at least getting more of the population to just be lackadaisical and just not care, they eventually can just sort of forcefully take it through democracy, okay? And then immediately, once you take, let's be very clear, and this is why you should be very smart about who you vote for. Once you vote in a communist, there's no going back. There's no more votes. There's no more democracy once they get there, okay? So once they get it, they got it. But that's how I foresee it. But what else will happen, okay? Again, all of those super chip manufacturers, semiconductor manufacturing chips and all that, it's all going to get destroyed. That is going to have a huge impact on the rest of the world and the economy. You can imagine the stock market will basically probably be the biggest stock market disaster since the Great Depression. Okay, that's realistic likelihood, because so much revolves, especially in the tech sector. You know, company like NVIDIA, if you've watched their progress, go to zero overnight. Okay, so you got to keep your eyes open for stuff like that as well. Right now, it also massively degrade the American military's capabilities. Why? Because all of our highest tech weapons use semiconductor chips from Taiwan itself. Okay, so we will be gutted militarily if this happens, regardless of if it happens, whether they take it by force, they take it by democracy, right? It's going to be bad news. Now, if they take it by democracy, they might not have time, or it'd be too long of a plan to take those chip factories, but then China owns them and controls them. That's not a whole lot better for the West either. Right? Now, yeah, moving on, got that. That's gonna get close. I know this was a long one to sort of wrapping this up. Now, this could have been, this could have been like a 2-day video. There's so much information on this if we would have deep dived everything about it. But again, this was to be more of a surface level understanding of the actual likelihood that China does this in the next couple of years. Again, the world is insanely uncertain right now. So while to me, it doesn't seem like it's strategically the move that China is going to make, also, oh man, you never know with the way the world is going right now. And with everything spiraling out of control all around the world, this could just be something they say, screw it, let's do it. This is the time. There's no better time, especially if certain someone gets reelected. Oh yeah, that is a pro-communist, pro-China American president. There is no better time than for China than that moment, that next 4 years. Okay, so we'll see, right? But hope this guys gave you, hope this gave you guys sort of a unique understanding of all the sort of the nuances that are gonna go into this, and the fact that it's not just so simple as China just decides to invade Taiwan and they just go take the island, right? It's gonna be way, way more complicated than that. But that's gonna do it for this one. Again, go cop your guys self some merch. I think what we're gonna do in the next video or two, we're getting back into some fitness stuff. I think in the next video, what I'm gonna do, actually go do one of the workouts from our programming at Modern Athlete Strength, show you guys exactly how I lift, why I lift the way I do, and for tactical-based fitness, because I know a lot of you guys have been interested in that. So be on the lookout for that one probably by Friday. All right, everybody, take care.